Hello, everyone. My name is Brock Hurd, and this is my presentation for housing policy. Today, we discuss the pandemic ravaging urban landscapes, gentrification. Perhaps you've heard about it in your academic studies, or you've actually seen it firsthand without even realizing it. But gentrification is a worldwide phenomenon, and its effects are devastating for low income residents. Now, in case you're wondering what this big word is, gentrification is basically, and in layman terms, the process of a low income neighborhood experiencing an influx of middle class in movers, which in turn pushes the low income residents out. To help you conceptualize this concept, what I want you to do is imagine a predominantly low income urban community. The people that live in this community are hardworking, some have families, but they happen to have lower paying jobs. Now, every morning, workers of this community would stop by a local Tim Hortons to buy a coffee. And they did this because, number one, of course, Tim Hortons has the best coffee. But more importantly, number two, Tim's coffee is an affordable luxury for members of this community. This goes on for several years until all of a sudden, a development project is approved by the city that permits the construction of new middle class homes, stores, as well as a Starbucks that's just down the road from Tim's. The income demographics of this community begin to change. Starbucks rises in popularity amongst new middle class residents, who, by the way, now outnumber existing low income residents. And Tim Hortons begins to feel the pressures as sales decrease. Then, Tim Hortons closes up shop and leaves low-income residents with only a Starbucks to buy coffee. And this becomes problematic because of two reasons. Number one, Starbucks on average is much more expensive than Tim's is. This could lead to low-income residents skipping out on purchasing a coffee due to budgetary constraints. And number two, Starbucks has a much different environment or atmosphere than a Tim Hortons does. This might make people feel out of place. And this analysis draws upon the work of philosopher Henry Lefebvre. He emphasized the importance of urban design and how certain infrastructures can be stigmatizing symbols. Now, when we talk about gentrification, it's important to note that it is subjective. Specifically, it's highly contested within the housing policy development, as its effects can be viewed as either positive or negative based upon the point of view of the persons that are analyzing or experiencing it. And research on gentrification has tended to have an intellectual bias, focusing on the production of middle-class living spaces rather than the consequences for low-income groups. Speaking of the consequences for low-income groups, we can see stigmatization, exclusion, and displacement. With respect to stigmatization, this happens when middle-class individuals begin to look down upon existing residents' social spaces or practices. Exclusion happens when existing residents do not feel as if the built environment represents them. So, for example, an affordable grocery store being replaced by a Sobeys, which is on average much more expensive than the average grocery store, or a Main Street bowling alley, which was an existing social space, being replaced by a boutique store, which may not interest low-income residents because they can't afford what the store is selling. Displacement is the final and most devastating effect of gentrification on low-income groups, and this happens when increases in cost of living, such as rent, utilities, and food, become so much that residents can no longer afford to live in the community, as well as services such as schools, shops, and pubs, which should cater to long-term residents, often disappearing. Obviously, low-income communities find themselves in a predicament. But what happens if we reinvent the wheel? What would happen if we allowed gentrification to continue, but enabled protections for existing residents? This is called social mix housing. When we think about the term social mix, it's easy to confuse it with diversification along the lines of ethnicity and culture. While diversification could definitely happen as a result of social mix, the policies are primarily concerned with income. Social mix comes from the standpoint that sees gentrification as inherent to low-income urban communities. So in other words, gentrification can't be stopped, so we're going to have to live with it, right? But anyways, Social mix is therefore often defined as gentrification where middle class in movers are not pushing low income residents out of the neighborhood, but through filling vacancies or increasing housing densities, are expanding the total population so that the proportion, but not the absolute number, of low income residents declines. Now, social mix housing has two goals. Firstly, it seeks to prevent low income exclusion caused by gentrification in the labor and utility markets. Second, it attempts to confront stigmatizing stereotypes by normalizing the lived environment within the broader urban context. Social mix policies have taken several forms, and there's no static plan on how it should be implemented. Thus, I'm going to provide you with two examples of successful implementations of social mix. So, firstly, let's fly on over to France. In 2000, the French Parliament enacted the SRU Housing Act, which is arguably the best example of state led social mix housing policy. This act mandates every urban community to reach a minimum of 20% social housing in its housing stock before 2020. Failure to commit and obtain this goal results in a fine from the federal government. And as France believes gentrification is inherent and unavoidable in urban communities, they have created a safety net for low income residents. Specifically, if the cost of living begins to rise due to gentrification, affected residents can apply for the state mandated APL program. This provides economic assistance to them. The goal of this policy is to create mixed income communities, which in turn will increase solidarity between the rich and the poor by eliminating ghettos. Now, with respect to confronting stereotypes, there's no better example than the current redevelopment project happening in Regent Park. Now, let's be honest, when Regent Park is often talked about, it's most often talked about in a negative light. And this is because of its historical origins as a slum clearance initiative. This was also discussed in the first week of class. Subsequently, it is now known for deteriorating buildings, poorly planned public spaces, and its concentration of some of the ills of urban life. In 2006, the City of Toronto clapped back at developing stereotypes around Regent Park by approving a $1 billion redevelopment plan that plans on replacing 1,800 non-market housing units, as well as build 5,400 new housing units. Further, the project aimed to add commercial, retail, and service-based land uses, as well as plan for a major central park and a large aquatic center. A key takeaway from this project is that it is attempting to gentrify the lived environment while still making it accessible to existing residents. Well, I wanted to thank you for listening to my presentation. And in summation, I just wanted to say that while I don't believe social mix is a 100% foolproof solution to gentrification, I do believe that if it is implemented correctly by the state, it can minimize but not eliminate the effects of gentrification on low-income residents.